Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of GRIDwrap. We're very happy to have here Professor Amy Schmitz Weiss with us today. Amy is also known as Montserrat Moreau in Second Life. Is that right, Amy?
That is correct.
Now, I'm just going to ask you a question that I possibly know the answer to, actually, is why did you choose that particular last name?
Actually, I was interested in choosing the first name because there was a place in Spain that I went to a long time ago, Montserrat. And so I focused on the first name of seeking that out versus the second part of the name. So.
Ah, right. So, and it makes, we like our alliteration, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now you are working in Second Life, and you've been in Second Life for 3 years, I see.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a journalist, what brought you in here? That's the first thing. And what kept you here? That's the second thing.
Well, what had me interested in going in this space was I was actually working on my PhD at the time and looking at different ways in which journalism education could be changed for the future, and looking at different platforms such as mobile devices as well as virtual worlds. And I was starting to see that there was quite a few news organizations that were jumping in at the time, Reuters and BBC and so forth. And I thought this may be a potential outlet by which journalists can consider themselves as a place where they can go for training and education, in addition to going in and reporting on the things that were going on in Second Life. So that was one of my first interests in going into Second Life. And what has kept me in this space is actually I have a virtual journalism learning center that I have been running now for over a year. It took me a while to get it set up and going, and now it's over a year old, and have been training journalists over the past year in the space from a variety of different countries in Latin America in particular.
Now, that's really interesting. Why do you think Latin America in particular?
Well, when I was working on my doctorate as well, I was involved with a program at the university called the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas, and it was a training center that trained journalists face-to-face as well as online in Latin America. And so based on my experience and time that I spent with the Knight Center, and I still do consulting for them these days, I thought it was a natural transition to look at expanding out to Latin America as well.
Well, it seems to me that, I don't know how you feel about this, I'm just going to put this out there, but Second Life is a fabulous opportunity, isn't it? Second Life and the other grids, whether it be Spot on 3D or InWorlds or Reaction Grid or any of the other grids out there, are fantastic opportunities for reaching other markets in order to educate or to spread education.
That is correct, yes. And I'm actually starting to veer into looking at expanding out into other virtual worlds here in the next year and a half as well. I'm hoping that, personally, I think that this is the future of where journalism is heading, and where journalism education can also go in that same direction as well. And so no matter what the virtual world platform it might be, I think it's important that journalists now, currently out there in the field doing their work, should be aware and familiar with this area, but also that the journalism students should become more aware of this space as well, because it's just going to become even more well-known and just a part of everyday life.
So let's talk about that for a while, because it's been well documented. I mean, Rupert Murdoch's foray with the Times, the British paper The Times, onto the internet and charging for it, it's become very, very well documented. And I think people are watching it, aren't they, to see what the future might be for basically the non-virtual press. Do you have a view on this? I mean, what about paying for the news? After a culture where people have become very used to getting everything free and accessible, do you think that's going to succeed?
I think the idea that news will be free and will continue, to be in that form of free, I think is it's not going to be the model of the future. I think in many cases you're going to find that just like the development of music, the idea that we actually could download music for 99 cents a song. Maybe 10 years ago people would have thought it was be foolish to do that versus just buying the whole album. But nowadays it's so easy with the click of the mouse to go in and buy the music just like that, that I think we're going to be at the point where news content will be formed in some kind of model like that as well, in which it will become more seamless, where the cost will be embedded within the platform and the device, so that there'll be less of a separation. Because right now it's a big disconnect between a subscription that you pay for and then the actual product that you receive, whether it's newspaper or whether it's a news broadcast through cable, etc. So I think it's going to become more within the device or the platform. It might take some while, but I do think that the idea that the news will be free in the future, I think it won't necessarily be the case. I don't think that journalism can survive in that realm as well.
I mean, there is a view, isn't there, that actually what will happen with that is that investigative journalism will suffer the most possibly from that. We can talk about humanities, we can do columns, we can go and talk to person over there. I mean, it's very accessible for talking to people who are actually maybe going through something or political drama or whatever's going on in their country at any particular time, and getting very accessible news or having people contribute to the news from those places very immediately in a sort of citizenship way of journalism. But when you come down to investigative journalism, which can be extremely expensive, what will happen to that?
With investigative journalism, you raise a wonderful point. I mean, it is having a huge impact in many news organizations around the world right now. Several of newsrooms have cut their staff from being able to go after those investigations, unfortunately. But at the same time, there is this development that's been happening here in the United States for a little while of nonprofit entities that are sprouting up that are focusing specifically on investigative journalism projects that in some cases take weeks to months to complete, with smaller staffs, of course, but then also collaborating through licensing, content licensing agreements with different news organizations, television stations, newspapers in the region. In particular, at our university, we actually just had a launch of a Watchdog Institute about a year ago, and they specifically are a nonprofit organization that focuses on doing investigative journalism, and they have had several stories that they've done in which they've partnered up with local television station newspapers in the region to offer up that investigative story. So I think you may find that investigative component may be removed from the typical traditional legacy media and more of its own separate entity, as we see here in the United States right now with several nonprofit journalism organizations sprouting up that have that model versus focusing on just covering day-to-day or breaking news.
Right. Well, I believe you set up something called the Nonprofit Journalism Hub. Is that to do with the same thing?
Oh, well, yes. Well, that one actually focuses on any kind of nonprofit journalism organization that has a focus in operating off of a nonprofit model, but serving the community. And it can include those organizations that do day-to-day news work, as well as those investigative news operations. And that was actually done in partnership with the Voice of San Diego in San Diego, California, that website.
That's a really good idea, isn't it? I mean, what's happening here? If we if we go to your site in Second Life, what can we see there? Is there an area where people can contribute to any kind of news vehicle, for example?
Currently in the Second Life space that I have now? Right now, it's basically a training center, currently right now. So I have future plans to expand out more, to offer up more resources and information up there. But currently, right now, it's just a training center to help journalists with their reporting, interviewing, communication skills, particularly during natural disasters and crises.
So we've got one on at the moment, haven't we? We've got the Australian one, there's one in Brazil, there's one in Sri Lanka, massive, massive floods everywhere. So how do you train somebody to deal with that?
Great question. Well, actually, the training that I do in the area that I have is basically a 2-hour training, and the journalists are given information in the beginning, tips and ideas, resources, and things to think about when a crisis occurs, because oftentimes we're human, just like anybody else, and when a crisis or natural disaster happens, we can forget what may naturally come to us if we were in a journalistic mode. So thinking about the situation, thinking about the appropriate sources to contact, those that may not necessarily be the usual sources to speak with, how to work with victims right in that moment, then and there. So it's a variety of different topics that are covered, and then after that they get put into 2 different scenarios in which they have to explore the natural disaster area and actually role play in the role of a journalist, a victim, as well as an official or unofficial source. Through that role-playing activity and through actually going through the natural disaster that's been simulated in the space, afterwards we come back, we reflect and talk about the situation, how they felt, because they only have a short period of time to do that, and then come back, discuss it, and then after that, then they have to write up a story, a brief story based on what they saw, what they experienced, and then get critiqued on that story. And quite interestingly, people really get into it. They realize in the moment, they start to cry as if they were the victim. They get upset, confused, frustrated, and anxious. So I think that the Second Life environment and platform really helps to bring some of those realities to life in many ways for the journalists in those moments, on how to cover a flooding or an earthquake or a tsunami, for instance.
Do you really see that, do the people come to you? That's what I'm asking. Do people come to you, or are you taking students from your university in real life and bringing them into virtual life? Or, can anybody apply to you for classes, for example?
Yes, currently I'm actually, this current spring semester, I'm going to be having my students go through the training this spring, my journalism students. The other part is journalists who are interested in doing the training can contact me. Currently, right now it's been through an application process that they go through to apply. But it's free, so there's no cost to do the training. So basically, it's open. At this point, the space is closed off. It's private for until the training starts up, and then people are invited to come in if they've been approved for entering into the training. So.
Okay, so it's not just, you're not just going to walk in and do a general class. That's a very good idea, because people need to be taking it seriously. You're looking at making people professional, presumably.
Correct.
So do they get, would they get some kind of certificate, if you like?
They do. They receive a certificate at the end for the completion of the exercise as well. And then there's plans that I'll be doing a second level of this training in the future.